Second Vatican Council, the issue of Mary, should she be in a separate document or included in a document of the Church, and what did both positions represent? Why did it become the single greatest controversy at the Second Vatican Council? Hello and welcome to Mary Class. This is Dr. Mark Miravalle, Professor of Theology and Mariology at the Franciscan University of Steubenville, in our little Mary mini-series on Marian controversies and the Second Vatican Council. We're examining this question, and in this segment we're going to take up that question. We left off in the last section talking about the statements of Father Rahner at the Fulda Conference in between the first and second sessions of the Second Vatican Council. And we left by talking about this one statement of Father Rahner. I want to go back to this statement because it's so key. Father Rahner is questioning the intention of the first draft, saying that perhaps there was lack of an honorable intention with the way that members of Rome and the Holy Office wrote this document. I want to repeat this statement once again because he says, again, this is quoting from Wiltgen, Father Rahner contended further that the schema as it stood used tactics which objectively are not honorable, since, quote, it declares that there is no intention of defining new dogmas and at the same time presents certain teachings as though they already belonged to the doctrine of the Church, although they are not yet dogmas and from a modern theological standpoint cannot become dogmas. So Father Rahner, I don't know why I keep talking about him as Karl Rahner, but Father Rahner is saying that you cannot pose a doctrine as if it were a dogma, but indeed the Council Fathers and this first draft never does. They pose doctrine as doctrine and dogma as dogma. And he seems to come to the conclusion that certain doctrines could never become dogmas based on a very dubious expression called the modern theological standpoint. Well, it's hard to know what that means, but you want to be careful about making limitations of a development of doctrine. Let me read what Father Wiltgen then goes on to say. He says, what Father Rahner attacked especially was the Church's schematic teaching on the mediation of the Blessed Virgin Mary and the title Mediatrix of all graces, which it gave the Blessed Virgin. This teaching was not proposed as a dogma of faith, but rather as a doctrine commonly held by Catholics. Although the teaching was supported by many pronouncements of the ordinary teaching authority of the Church, especially by recent papal encyclicals, quote, this doctrine must nonetheless be carefully pondered anew, writes Father Rahner, for the schema would have, quote, great influence on Mariology and on the devotion of the faithful to Mary, end quote. If the word mediation were to be used at all, it must be most clearly defined. So, as Father Wiltgen states clearly, there was nothing wrong with the original schema. Certainly there could be adjustments made to it, but this charge of a dishonorable intention is rather dubious on the part of Father Rahner. The original document stated doctrines as doctrines and dogmas as dogmas, but Father Rahner was particularly concerned about mediatrix. Father Wiltgen goes on to say, quote, Father Rahner painstakingly listed for the German and Austrian Council Fathers precisely what he felt should be changed or omitted in the existing schema. The whole substance of the schema, he contended, could be stated, quote, without stirring up these difficulties and dangers, end quote. And he suggested, by way of conclusion, that, quote, the bishops of Austria, Germany, and Switzerland should consider themselves, quote, forced to declare openly that they could not accept the schema in its present form. The Fulda Conference adopted his suggestions, with one major exception. He had been opposed to leaving the title Mediatrix in the text. But the proposals eventually submitted to the General Secretariat of the Council by the Fulda Conference read as follows, quote, by far the greater part of the Council Fathers of Austria, Germany, Switzerland, and Scandinavia are not completely opposed to retaining the words mediatrix and mediation in the schema. However, it seems desirable that the expression mediatrix of all graces should not be used. These expressions, the Council Fathers explained, would raise the problem as to how the Virgin could be the mediatrix of the sacramental graces flowing from the very nature of the sacraments themselves, a question, quote, which might be well avoided, end quote. Now, two comments here. First of all, Father Rahner is telling this group of German, Austrian, Swiss fathers don't bring up mediation at all. Leave the whole thing out, which is a frightening context in terms of discussing Mariology. Thank God the Council Fathers did not follow this, because you've got 3 powerful paragraphs, Lumen Gentium, 60, 61, and 62, talking about Our Lady's mediation, after 58 talks about, and 57 talks about her role in co-redemption. Imagine leaving out of a conciliar treatment on our Blessed Mother any reference of her role in intercession. It's a phenomenal concept. And yet, that was Father Rahner's suggestion. Now, the Church, the Council Fathers from the Rhinelands do not accept that proposal, but they entirely accept Father Rahner's suggestion to go back into the Council, in the next session of the Council, and say, we have been forced to reject this schema as it is. We want Mary not to have a separate document. We want Mary to be included in a chapter in the document on the Church, or as Father Rahner puts a suggestion, an epilogue. That means she's not even treated at all, but she's kind of an afterthought as a kind of a cherry on the cake at the end of the treatment on the Church. Okay. So this is what the Fathers do. The topic before the 37th General Congregation held on September 30th. Now we're back at the Second Vatican Council. Okay. The first working meeting of the second session was the revised schema on the Church. As the first speaker on this topic, Cardinal Franz of Cologne, Germany, stated that it would be most fitting to include in the schema on the Church everything pertaining to the Blessed Virgin Mary. Among other considerations, such action would do much to foster dialogue with the separated Christians. The Cardinal pointed out that his stand was endorsed by 65 German-speaking and Scandinavian Council Fathers. So with Father Rahner suggests to the cardinals and to the bishops from Germany and Austria and Switzerland and Scandinavia is, do not allow Mary to have a separate schema. Don't give her her own document at the Second Vatican Council. Put her in a chapter in the Church, or put her at the end of the chapter. At the very first moment of the second session, the cardinal from Germany, Cardinal Franz, poses this. And that kicks off a discussion, which is a very heated discussion, arguably the most heated discussion that happens at the council. Different cardinals and bishops go up and talk about the pros and cons. What many of the cardinals and bishops from the Tiber countries, in other words, Italy and Spain, Latin America, Philippines, India, Africa, they're caught off guard by this, and they're beginning to be concerned that perhaps it's more than just a location. It really is going to be bespeaking a whole idea of how central or decentral the discussion of Mary should be. So you have a process of discussions that happen. And Father Wiltgen will go through specific discussions. And to summarize them, you have bishops coming up and saying, well, yes, I agree with Cardinal Franz. We want to place Mary in the Church. We want to avoid any extremes. And the keynote, my friends, the keynote is ecumenism. We want this to be in favor of ecumenism. Others come back and say, no, ecumenism means to articulate the truth about Our Lady. And I want to close this segment with this quote from Cardinal Spellman of the United States. He said, and I quote, this is from Wiltgen now, numerous council fathers were quoted, including Cardinal Spellman, who had asked in a written intervention whether the schema could pass over in silence titles like co-redemptrix, reparatrix, and others used by the Supreme Pontiffs, simply because, quote, they would be rather difficult for Protestants to understand. The Cardinal was opposed to this sort of reasoning, he said, because, quote, the task of an ecumenical council is to teach the members of the Church rather than those outside of it. So here you have kind of a lining up of Christotypical Mariologists and ecclesiotypical Mariologists, Rhineland countries versus Tiber countries. We're going to see in our next segment how this turns out. Thanks for being with us at Marycast. Continue with us as we talk about Marian controversies at the Second Vatican Council. God bless from Marycast.